And then the journey begins, usually with looking for a shell. Most securities firms, if they're practicing their securities profession, they'll know people that have shells and develop shells, and they can make some phone calls and scout around and come up with a vehicle for their client. There's probably 5 or 6 different types of shells. It depends on their status. Probably the most important separation would be reporting versus non-reporting company. So what that would mean is, let's say there could be a public company that has never completed a registration with the SEC, but it is a public company, primarily because it has a shareholder base and it trades its stock on the pink sheet. So it's got a trading symbol. Market makers can buy and sell the stock. The trading symbol shows up on computers all over the world, and on, of course, brokers' quotrons. But let's say a non-reporting company hasn't committed itself to be bound by the 1934 Securities Act, and as a result of that, most sophisticated investors will stay away from that company because, number one, it's not obligated to produce audits. It's not obligated to disclose its controlling shareholders. It's not obligated to abide by proxy rules. Self-dealing is quite common and it's allowed. Where the other kind of a company is a reporting company, and this would be a company that has filed a registration statement with the SEC, which means that that company in effect operates in a fishbowl. It has to provide annual and quarterly financial reports. It's bound by all the proxy rules. Self-dealing is not allowed. All shareholder positions have to be disclosed. All affiliates have to be recorded and filed. And a reporting company is the only kind of a company that can trade on the Bulletin board or go to the NASDAQ or Amex or New York Stock Exchange. So to be on to be on any kind of a reasonable stock exchange, you have to be a reporting company. So reporting companies, those shells cost more than the non-reporting. And then of those reporting companies, there are companies that have trading symbols, and there are companies without trading symbols. So there can be a public shell that has its shareholder base that's completed a registration but does not have a trading symbol and does not trade on the Bulletin board. Those are called virgin shells. And usually they're shells that are created specifically to be a vehicle for a reverse merger. But the reason they don't have a trading symbol is the SEC does not allow a shell company to have a trading symbol. Now, a lot of people say, well, how's that possible? Because there's a lot of shells out there that have a trading symbol. And the reason that's possible is that those shells may have at one time been engaged in some business that failed. They might be in the software business, they might be drilling for oil, but they can have some sort of a business activity that didn't work. But at one time they were trying to make it work, and they were an operating company and had a symbol. What happens is they liquidate out their business, they become a shell, but they hold on to their symbol. Now those are pretty valuable. The other kind of a company would be a public company that's a reporting company that, let's say, starts out with an objective. It's going to engage in some sort of a, let's say, a small level business, like, let's say, it's going to be a consultant, or it's going to be an advisor to import-export. It's going to, but some minor kind of insignificant enterprise, but it's still an operational enterprise. And because the company has a business plan and because it has some operations, it can get a symbol. So it's like a shell in the sense that it doesn't have assets, it doesn't have liabilities, but it has a semblance of a business plan, so now it has a trading symbol. So that would be a bulletin board reporting shell. So all bulletin board companies are reporting. That's probably the most ideal shell. There is no such thing as a NASDAQ shell or an American Stock Exchange or a New York Stock Exchange shell. There used to be, but there aren't any longer. So those exchanges have all, over the years, modified their standards where they don't allow it. So let's say if a NASDAQ company isn't doing well and wants to transition into a new kind of a business and wants to liquidate all its assets, if new management comes in and takes over, the mere fact that it's new management, change of control, means you have to reapply for your listing. Even if you kept the same management but you change your business direction, you have to reapply for your listing. So it's just a lot of rules that prevent any kind of reverse merger other than at the bulletin board level. The biggest risk in a shell is that you buy a shell that you believe is without problems that ends up with problems. And so everybody wants what they call a, quote, clean shell. Now, and by the way, just so you know, is that everybody that has a shell for sale, they're all clean. So let's say a bandit that's got all kinds of problems isn't going to say, I have a problem shell for sale. It's called a clean shell. So everything is a clean shell. But whether it is or not that's another story. The consequences of buying a shell that have problems are just almost beyond description what can happen. I'll give you an example of maybe some very difficult situations. Let's say a company lies in its registration form to the SEC. They might have lied 3 or 4 years ago. In the meantime, the company does a reverse merger, good company moves into it, everything is wonderful, and now the fraud that maybe somebody else committed in the registration by withholding some information or misrepresenting a stock position. But the SEC then can come back and say that the registration was accomplished by virtue of a fraud. Therefore, legally it didn't happen. Therefore, you're not a public company. And worse, all the shares that have been sold aren't freely tradable. Those were privately sold shares. They have to be bought back. Now they announce a rescission. So who's ever currently in control of that company is forced to have to buy back all the shares that were ever issued. And they're a private company. So it's guaranteed bankrupt, it's over. I mean, that's about as bad as it could be. Other things that happen that are almost impossible for somebody to tell would be if, let's say, the management of that shell were to grant a stock option to his brother-in-law or some friend for a couple of million shares at 10 cents a share. And then he just doesn't tell anybody. But they've got a board resolution, they sign it, they got it notarized, and it's all of this documentation, and then it goes into somebody's safe and it sits there. And then somebody merges in, and now the stock's trading, and somebody comes out of the woods and starts waving a stock option at him, and it really is a stock option. Big problem. And the lawyers will say, oh, don't worry about it, we'll sue the hell out of him. But the market was going to be scared. Because let's say if all the investors think that there's 10 million shares issued, and the stock trades based on a certain earnings with 10 million shares outstanding, somebody stands up and says, hey, I've got 4 million, I got a right for 4 million shares. Well, the investors don't know, is it going to be 14 million shares or going to be 10 million shares? No matter what the lawyers say, the investors are going to say, oh, hey, this is a problem, I'm getting out of here. And the stock collapses. And it might be a hoax, but it might not be. But just the fact that somebody claims to own that, big problem. So there are a lot of horror stories of companies that come in and they pay a fair price and they hire good law firms, and those law firms do the due diligence, and when they're all done, nobody knows. We buy a lot of shells and we sell a lot of shells, and I'm really, really good at measuring a shell, and I can't tell. So when I buy a shell that's had operations in it, I don't care what they tell me, I don't care what the audits say, I don't care what the legal opinions are, I don't believe it. When I buy a company like that, I put it on the shelf and I wait out the statute of limitations.
Which is?
Sometimes it can be as long as 7 years. Other times 5 years, 3 years. But there's no way that I'm going to go to somebody, because I mean, because the truth is, I can say, here's a shell, I think it's clean, but I don't know.
Sure.
I can't guarantee it because I wasn't there. I don't know. The only way I can guarantee it is by put it up on the shelf and let the statute of limitations run. Now I can guarantee it.